Hello, and welcome to episode 20 of the God Cells podcast. I'm Eric Merola. In today's podcast, I speak to Casper from Sweden, who had been suffering from brain damage. And, incredibly, he found my documentary, The God Cells, about fetal stem cell therapy offered in Kyiv, Ukraine. Casper went to emcell in Ukraine last October during the Russian invasion. In fact, he was there only a week after I had left Kyiv in September. 3 months after fetal stem cell therapy, Casper explained to me how he can now think again for the first time after suffering from debilitating brain damage for 10 years. It's a remarkable conversation, and we talk about a lot of the other things related to the roadblocks fetal stem cell therapy has around the world, as well as some of my experiences with my other documentaries. It's always great to get a different perspective from those who do not live in the United States and how they view the world, this therapy, and the medical system as a whole. As always, if you have questions about this therapy or want to ask me anything about this, email me at eric@ericmerola.com. That's ERIC@ERICMEROLA.com. I will be releasing my 6th documentary, Ukraine, Fetal Stem Cell Pioneers, likely before the February 24th 1-year mark of the Russian invasion on YouTube, on various YouTube channels that have millions of subscribers. This is a little earlier than I had planned, but why not? If you want to be notified of its release, sign up to my mailing list at ericmerola.com. That's ERICMEROLA.com or stemcellsmovie.com. Or you can email me and I will add you to my list. I hope you enjoy today's podcast with Casper from Sweden, who has reversed his brain damage with fetal stem cells.
Hello.
Hello, Casper.
Hi, Eric. Can you hear me?
I can hear you great. It's so great to meet you. Like so many people that I do these podcasts with, I only speak to them via email. And then we stay in touch. And then, I hear, people like yourself having really great results from the therapy. And I say, hey, would you like to do a podcast with me? And so it's nice. I went back to my emails actually before we got on the phone. You had some kind of brain injury. Am I correct about this?
Yeah, that's correct. So I've had, for 10 years now, I've had issues with my brain where honestly, I can't find a good translation from the Swedish condition. We call it hjärntrötthet. It literally translates to brain fatigue. But when I look at the symptoms of brain fatigue, it doesn't seem to be the same, but let's just call it brain fatigue for lack of a better word. I can't find any other better translation.
So it wasn't from an injury, correct? It's not an injury.
It wasn't from a head trauma. It was from drug abuse.
Okay.
And so there's a lot of things that happened to me during that period. This was 10 years ago. And they seem to think that it was the drugs that caused this. Even though I wasn't a big, mostly when I was young, I maybe partied or did stupid stuff. That was about it.
Sure.
But it could have been maybe who knows what the street drugs might contain. It's for people listening. This is a good warning to be careful when you do that stuff. So I just want to be honest about what happened to me and my origin story. So
sure.
So but anyways, so this pretty much ruined my life for 10 years up until now.
Wow.
I was in. So I was in university back then. I was on my last year. I was studying to become a software engineer. I actually didn't finish. My last season, I couldn't do it anymore because my brain wouldn't let me. So all those years studying just down the drain for nothing. So after that, everything I did was just trying to find a way to recover. I didn't do much. I did a bit recovering up until like 2 or 3 years into the process of whatever you want to call it. But it wasn't until I had this treatment that I really had a big difference.
That's amazing. So go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah,
well,
go ahead.
While we were speaking, I looked. You were there in October of 2022, so you were there fairly recently.
Yeah, that's correct.
I was there in September. We must have just missed each other.
Exactly. I was there 3rd of October.
Okay. Well, so I'd love to hear more. I mean, so it was 10 years ago. You had some recovery after a few years, and then you discovered fetal stem cell therapy. I'm assuming through one of my movies, I'm assuming?
Yeah, that's correct. So I I looked into stem cells maybe 2 or 3 years ago. The first time I just discovered like maybe this might be helpful in some way. I didn't have enough information about like what to search for or who to go to, and because it's kind of expensive. It's not a cheap treatment. So it took me a couple of years to, as I mentioned, I didn't have the ability to focus or read and do stuff like that. So it took me a while to gather information and just trying to make a good decision. But your documentary really helped because you kind of, how do you say, you collected everything I needed to know in a very good way. Like, so I had some background in doing my own research, but you really collected the essential parts. And I feel like without the documentary, I wouldn't have done the treatment. So it was really helpful for me.
That's wonderful. I'd love to. First of all, I'd like to ask you about your symptoms you had before and after treatment, like what you felt. But going back to classifying, earlier you said you weren't sure how to translate it from Swedish to English. Would you, like, it's a common term in the United States or English to say brain damage. Would you think that's a fair?
Yeah.
You say that would be called brain damage. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is. Because usually when this condition I have, they can't really find anything on the X-rays, and I've read studies where Swedish patients have been researched on, and they can't really find the brain damage is kind of. I'm not sure like how much brain damage you need to have to be in this kind of condition, but what they see is that the brain starts working in a different way. It doesn't work in a normal way anymore. And this is after the brain has somehow recovered.
Okay.
So it is most usually something that happens after a stroke or a head trauma, or like for me example, it's drug abuse. And so yeah, it's brain damage.
Okay. So I would love for you to expand upon, because to be honest, you are the first person that I have ever interviewed or even had a phone conversation with that has had brain damage. I know they've treated other people, but as far as people that I have personally communicated with, I think you might be the first one that has specifically had brain damage that has gone there for therapy. And so obviously it would be really important for anyone finding this conversation that is in your situation or knows someone. So what I'm looking for, I would love for you to describe to me, like more in detail, what kind of, you mentioned it a little bit, but like, what were you experiencing from the day to day before going to therapy? And then if you don't mind, just after you went for therapy, maybe how long it took and like what you noticed overall as the stem cells began to start doing their job. Do you know what I mean? Would you mind explaining that?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Yeah, of course. Yeah. So my symptoms before I did the treatment was it was inability to focus. I was very sensitive to stress. Mm-hmm. I was very anxious. I couldn't sleep well. I mean, I had to go on sleep medication to be able to sleep. So, and depression, and honestly, the worst thing was the inability to think. That is something that the treatment started to work on pretty fast. Mm-hmm. It took about. Well, let me work from the beginning. Maybe it's better. The first few weeks, I noticed as things started to happen. I started to be able to think better. I was starting to be able to focus. And I want to say around 2 or 3 months, maybe about 2.5 months, I started noticing like huge improvements. Up until like 2.5 months, it was small increments, but I noticed like stuff happening. Mm-hmm. But after 2.5 months, I started noticing like huge leaps of improvements. I went from like not being able to work at all to now I'm working at 80%, mm-hmm. which is a huge thing for me. So now it's been like 3 months, right? 3 months and a week.
Yep.
Or 2 weeks, maybe. Yeah, 3 months and 2 weeks, something like that. And I'm still improving. I'm not sure how long I will improve. Maybe you have a better answer for that.
Well, yeah, let me tell you. So the reason it takes 2 or 3 months generally, and some people it works faster, other people it works slower. But the reason for this is the way that this therapy is administered is that once the cells are injected, that the cells begin to proliferate and multiply. Not only are this, like in your case, you were given 24 roughly different stem cell types, but in your case, they gave you a much higher dose of the neurological related stem cells, which were harvested from the brain. And before I continue, were you also injected in the spinal canal, the intrathecal injection?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
That was done on the third day.
Okay, great. I was hoping that would be the case. I'm assuming they would have recommended that to you. So you got an extra boost. So you remember the injections in your abdomen and your fat on your abdomen?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You had neuronal cells, in addition to many other types of cells, injected there. But on the third day, they only concentrated on the neuronal cells into your spinal canal through the intrathecal. So, but going back to your question.
Okay.
This is interesting because you're looking at other stem cell types. So first of all, outside of fetal, every other stem cell type does not provide genuine neuronal brain cells. It's impossible. You can only harvest them from the brain itself, and nor can any other mesenchymal or similar non-fetal stem cell, including umbilical, placental, doesn't matter. They cannot transform into a neuronal cell after injection. So what they do is they will cultivate the cells and let them proliferate in a petri dish in vitro in the lab, and then inject them into the patient. Again, I'm talking about non-fetal, the regular blood cells from the umbilical cord or the adult. So, but in the case of emcell and fetal stem cells, they do not believe in letting them proliferate and replicate in the lab because they realize it ruins them before they're injected. They want them to replicate and to proliferate after they enter your body. And they only give smaller amounts. They give just the right amount, not a gigantic amount, because they know how they behave after injection. So it takes 2 to 3 months for those cells, particularly the neuronal cells, to fully proliferate, where they're at that maximum value, if you would, where let's just say, for example, they injected you with thousands of cells, but of neuronal cells. Let's just pretend there was one stem cell of neuronal. That one stem cell creates 1,000. So it takes 2 or 3 months for that to happen. So that's why you don't see this instant reaction. So yes, while they're inside of you, they are regenerating your brain and your brain tissue and the neurological system itself. But while that is happening, they're also multiplying and making themselves more abundant and making more of them, just repeating and replicating, over and over and over again, just like from biology class, when cells divide and replicate. So, but yeah, at the 3-month mark, they've basically replicated to like their sort of maximum capability, if that makes sense. So,
that makes sense.
And so that's why you feel its maximum effect at around 2 to 3 months. So it's remarkable. And it's interesting because you are a classic case of when emcell says you have to expect 2 or 3 months before you see significant improvement. And it really confuses people because some people have these very fast reactions, like some people with multiple sclerosis, which is technically a neurological condition. They start walking around in 5 days when they had to have a walker or a cane. And there's really no explanation. Oh, wow. I know, it's really bizarre. Anyway, it's really exciting, to see this happen for you, because also the damage was done 10 years ago. And what generally, and see, what's also interesting, Casper, is generally with particularly damage to the nervous system and the brain, the longer you wait to get the therapy, the harder it is to have good results because the damage has been there for so long. It is more recommended to have the stem cells done as fast as possible after the therapy. Yet you still 10 years out of having this damage, you're still getting amazing results, which is very exciting, Casper. Wow. Do you mind me asking how old you are?
I'm 37 now. Okay. So I was 27 when this happened.
Okay. So that's also helps because you're younger. You're not like in your 60s or 70s. And it's also interesting, because you asked me in a text what other treatments what other ailments this treats, which I'm happy to answer more of if you'd like to ask me. But like children with autism.
Go ahead. So can I, before you answer that, it's like, I would like to know what kind of ailments you can help with this, and also what are the limitations?
Sure. I'd be happy to answer that.
Both of them. Yeah.
I'm going to start with autism because of what I was just explaining about your age and having this damage for 10 years. So with children with autism, I followed 2 of them for my new documentary, but I've spoken to so many more and done podcasts with others, families as well. But generally, like if an older child with autism comes in, like say age 12, emcell generally says, they say, don't expect huge results because the child is much, much older. We have much better results with younger children. Now, that being said, I have seen a nonverbal child at 12 get treated and start speaking a month later. I've seen that. But the kids in my new documentary, one was 4 years old, nonverbal, started speaking after the first week, as first words ever. Like the kid had to have a machine to speak before, like he would push buttons to communicate with his teachers and his parents. And another child who was very difficult to control, very bad mood issues and impossible to follow instructions, doing great. And both of those children were young. So going back to, so I just wanted to explain that because it is also neurological. Let's go ahead and start immediately with the limitations. Well, I'll talk about limitations as far as ailments. For some reason, ALS, that's the only ailment I have seen that this can't completely reverse. It's very sad and unfortunate. It's one of those horrible diagnoses where there's literally like nothing on earth that can slow this down. So getting that out of the way. But I've seen amazing remissions with multiple sclerosis and Parkinson's. But going to the limitations on those 2 ailments, it's similar. It's similar. Like the longer you've had it, the harder it is for the cells to really reverse it. So I have a woman in the new documentary. I need to send you the new documentary. I'll give you a password protected link to allow you to see it. I'm happy to share it with you.
I would appreciate that.
Yeah. I'll send that to you when we're finished. But my point is I have 4 multiple sclerosis patients in this new documentary that I've been following for a while. All of them were diagnosed less than 5 years before they were treated with fetal stem cells. One of them was diagnosed 18 years prior to being treated with fetal stem cells. That woman had, with 18 years diagnosis, she is actually a medical nurse. So she was very well versed in the whole medical field, and she knew exactly, what to look for, et cetera. But she realized, she said, I have at least 20 years worth of damage, even though she was diagnosed 18 years ago. And so she had not nearly the kind of results after one therapy as the other ones did, but she was able for the first time in her, the last 10 years to walk around her house unassisted. I mean, she can get a cup of coffee and walk to the backyard. Yeah. But she can't like run down the street or do anything like that or walk 5 miles, while the other patients can. And honestly, it's the same with Parkinson's. The longer ago they were diagnosed, the harder it is. So, and also it's not always a one treatment fixes everything, because degenerative diseases, and you could say that brain damage is also not a disease, but it's a degenerative condition because your brain has degenerated, right? And fetal stem cells, all they do is regenerate. They're rebuilding. So the brain cells are rebuilding the brain. The heart cells are rebuilding the heart, etc. So if you have, only a couple of years of damage to the brain or the heart, etc., those fetal stem cells have much less work to do to rebuild them. But if you have 10 or 20 years worth of damage, meaning not like you, where you did the damage 10 years ago and that was it, but with a degenerative disease, the damage continues. Every year it gets worse because
it's progressive.
Because the disease remains. That's why they call it a progressive disease. So, to say what are the limitations, it's difficult to answer other than what I'm saying. It's like the more damage, the harder it is. Now, that said too, with a progressive degenerative disease, getting the therapy, honestly, in the cases of multiple sclerosis and Parkinson's and sometimes autism, getting it every year or every 2 years to really push it back and keep it away is sometimes necessary. So one might call that a limitation in comparison to, say, somebody getting pneumonia and taking one antibiotic and having it go away, right? So it's kind of a subjective way to say with limitations. But like another limitation, for example, an adult with adult onset diabetes. So like a lot of Americans, especially, people that drink too many Coca-Colas, they eat too much sugar, they eat too much white pasta, they give themselves type 2 diabetes. So my father is one of them. So my father could not feel his feet. He had neuropathy in his feet, like the classic case of, because it destroys your circulatory system, it threatens your eyesight. So I dragged my father to Ukraine. His feet are now perfect. He held a hot hairdryer to his feet and couldn't feel it. Yeah. So it was that bad. So of course I dragged him to Ukraine and he got the therapy. So, but if he did not change his lifestyle, and if he did not stop drinking Pepsis and stop eating the things that gave him diabetes, which he did do, it would have just come right back. It would have all happened again. Also, too, if you think about it, we are all, as we age, we are all degenerating as we age. Every year, things are degenerating worse and worse. So all fetal stem cells are doing is fighting against that natural progression of both from an anti-aging standpoint as well as from a degenerative disease standpoint. So in your case, again, I know you probably don't want to go back there again during the Russian invasion, but I would seriously consider seeing where you are in about a year from October, maybe see where you are like July, August, September. And if you are able to afford it and you did it again a year later, I'm honestly, you will probably see even more improvements. It's going to build upon your previous therapy because all of those stem cells, and I go into this deeply in the new documentary, which I'll send you, but the stem cells stay in you and they don't leave your body, the fetal stem cells. And so when you're given a second round of therapy, say a year later, those new stem cells join the old, and the old kind of become out of dormancy, and it's almost twice as powerful. It's a fascinating situation. And I know. And because I've had this myself almost every year since 2016, when I first went to emcell. And I honestly feel I'm 50 years old. I have no aches and pains. I never get a cold or a flu. I did get COVID in Christmas of 2021, like so many. It was very mild. I once got strep throat 2 months after my second therapy in 2017. I didn't know I had it. I had this mild irritation in my throat for 2 weeks. I went into a local clinic and just said, look, it was like, it was walking distance from me. I said, look, I've had this weird sore throat thing. It doesn't really bother me that much, but it's been 2 weeks now. So the doctors swabbed my throat, went back for, 15 minutes because they had the lab there. The doctor came back in the room. His face was just like in shock, saying, how long have you had this? And I said, like I said, 2 weeks. He said, you have strep throat. I said, what? I mean, and I don't know if you've ever had strep throat. And,
I've had it. It's painful. It's really painful.
It's debilitating. And I honestly, I can't think of any other reason why I walked around with strep throat for 2 weeks other than the stem cells keeping it at bay. Like it kept fighting against it, even though it's a bacterial issue. I know, it's crazy, isn't it? But ask me some more about limitations. Maybe ask me something specific.
I just want to answer the thing you said about before I answer your question. The thing you said about me revisiting Ukraine. I mean, I'm actually planning on bringing my parents to Ukraine because I think that they might benefit from it as well. And they're getting old now, so I mean, why not? And I'm not sure where I'm going to be in 1 year, if I'm fully recovered or if this is like the maximum recovery for this treatment. I'm not sure where I'm going to be in a year or so, but if I'm not 100%, I'm going to go back again, without a doubt. I mean, it's a no-brainer for me. Nothing has helped me for 10 years. This is the only thing that has given me back quality of life. And I'm not saying I'm fully recovered. Maybe I will be, maybe not. Maybe it requires 1 or 2 or 3 treatments, but it doesn't really matter because money is not an issue when you don't really, like when you have a condition like I have, or like MS, degenerative diseases or stuff like that. So I mean, So what was your? Yeah. Go ahead.
I was saying the reason why you have not found anything up until fetal stem cells to help the brain damage is because no chemical on Earth can rebuild brain tissue. No stem cell on Earth can rebuild brain tissue except neuronal brain cells, and you can only get that from the fetal material. That's simple as that. And so, and honestly, you mentioned your parents. That's wonderful because both of my parents, my brother, my wife's mother, my wife's aunt, and many friends have gone. I want everyone in my life that I care about to get this therapy. And what's interesting that I've seen over and over again, once someone like yourself goes, they end up going back with their parents or going back with their sister or their wife or whatever. Yeah. And so, nothing could be more beneficial for an aging person than this therapy for all of the reasons that I mentioned about the regenerative nature of it. Because not only does it regenerate the vital organ tissues, but it also is a huge disease preventative. It prevents heart disease. It prevents the diminishing of the blood vessels. It prevents brain decline. You can speak for that yourself because older people, we all know. I'm not saying that it's going to perfectly prevent Alzheimer's, but there's a lot of reason to believe it would. But the basic brain deterioration that comes with age, it prevents all of that because you're constantly regenerating and rejuvenating the brain with these brand new 7 to 12 week old brain cells that are floating around in, say, a parent's brain that's 75, 80 years old. It just makes scientific sense, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And there's actually... do you remember we talked about the Swedish clinical trials, which was done with fetal stem cells?
I don't know if you did.
Yeah, I sent you. I because everything is written in Swedish, so you have to I sent you a couple of.
I remember now. Yeah. And if I remember correctly,
it wasn't the whole document.
If I remember correctly, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think we translated. That's right. We did Google Translate somewhat, or I did, right? I think I did it a little bit with you.
Yeah.
And
that's correct. Yeah, that's correct. I'm not sure what they did. I know that. Well, there's a couple of things. They used 6 or 8 fetuses for a single. They did clinical trials on people with Parkinson's. So another thing to know before I talk about it is that they don't do this anymore. This is they've halted this treatment because they don't think it's ethical and they don't think it's not going to be able to be available to everyone because there's not enough fetuses. This is what they say. I'm not saying that's what I think. I'm just saying this is what they're saying. They saw good results.
Yeah. I remember now. I remember all of this now. Yes. I remember how comical it was for them to say there's not enough fetuses when there's 50 million abortions annually every year, whether, people find it ethical or not. And here's my theory. I don't mean to jump to conclusions here, but I've just been studying innovative scientific technologies since 2009 with my focus on fetal stem cells, basically since 2014, is that there's 2 things happening. Well, 3. One, of course, 50% of the world is against abortion. So you have that problem. And then the second the second one is that if this was allowed to go through, even getting past the abortion issue, you cannot patent this technology. So if they're able to reverse Parkinson's, in this case, Parkinson's, that's what they're studying, and they do the work and they spend the hundreds of millions of dollars of clinical trials in Sweden, just in Sweden, let's say, and they put it on the market. Okay, let's say the company, let's call the company just for fun, the Casper company, and they spent $200 million on these fetal stem cells for Parkinson's. It works great. They start to get remissions, and then Casper company goes to the Swedish regulatory agency and gets it approved in Sweden for Parkinson's. What will happen is, because they can't patent it, what will happen is they would have already spent $200 million, and then every other biotech company in Sweden will then say, thanks, Casper, we are now going to compete with you since you did all the work and spent all the money, and we are going to harvest our own abortions, and we're going to treat people, and it'll just be a big, it'll be a big competition. And so you have that. And then secondly, because of that, It doesn't fit within the market model, unfortunately, because the way the system works, the current drug marketplace works is you want to find a chemical, one chemical, or a couple of chemicals that you can patent and monopolize the market on, and then move to the next chemical.
Yeah.
And this slaps in the face of all of it, unfortunately. It's just economics 101. It's just, economics, unfortunately.
Yeah. No, I mean, you have to follow the money. It's very easy. I think after doing the treatment myself, I can't find any good reason not. I mean, even if it's true, they say that there's not enough fetuses, okay? At least help the people you can help. If it's 10 people, then help those 10 people. You don't have to help everyone. So I don't get that. Why do you deny everyone just because you find it hard to have fetuses for every single patient? I mean, it's I don't get it. Of course, it's probably what you're saying is probably the reason, and also I think it's very political. It's a controversial topic. People, as you mentioned, people are scared of abortions. It's like, are there going to be a black market for fetuses? Stupid stuff like that. But anyways, I think it's very tragic because that was what I wanted to say. In the clinical trials, they saw that after 10 years, the neuronal cells were still in the patient's brain. They could still find them.
Yep. I'm glad you mentioned that.
That's crazy.
No, it's not crazy, actually, because I go into this deeply in the new documentary. So I talked about this a little bit in the God Cells, but I actually opened up the movie with this because I think it's so important. The reason this therapy was ever even conceived of or even thought about is because we've known actually for over 100 years that the fetal cells during pregnancy in the maternal body, the fetal cells migrate out of the womb into the maternal body. And they find new homes in the mother, and they also have been known to repair like congenital heart defects, parts of the brain, and protect the mother, which makes perfect sense because of Mother Nature wanting to protect the mother host, right? So, and they even were able to prove this by women who donated their bodies to science later on. They found male chromosomes in the brains and the hearts and in other organs of women who had given birth 50, 60 years prior. And it was, and because they were male, that's how they could be identified, obviously. They're like, wow, why are there men's chromosomes all over this woman's brain, her heart? It's because they gave birth to a son decades earlier. Yeah. So, one thing led to another and more research had been done. And I'll just give you a quick lesson. So what happened was these Ukrainians in the former Soviet Union, even back in the late 70s, early 80s, were researching this. And they were really studying it intensely. And they were actually researching it in animals, from mice to, no one likes to talk about animal testing, but horses, everything. They did it in everything to test it, but they had never done it in people before. And so in 1986, Chernobyl hit, that horrible nuclear disaster, Chernobyl, and all of these people were dying of aplastic anemia or bone marrow failure due to the radiation exposure. And because these scientists knew that at the 7 to 12 week end of first trimester, the liver, the fetal liver in all mammals, whether you change the mathematics depending on the other mammals, but for humans within 9 months, at the 7 to 12 week mark, the liver is the foundation of the body's bone marrow and blood system. So they said, okay, all these people were dying of bone marrow failure, right? So they're like, well, we can't find bone marrow transplants fast enough because we have to find matches. And secondly, we can't even get a bone marrow match from these poor people that are dying because the bone marrow is so destroyed. So why don't we maybe think about perhaps just taking fetal liver cells, inject it into their bloodstream and see what happens? And those people are the founders of emcell. And they started, I know. Yeah. And they,
go.
yeah, and they cured aplastic anemia or bone marrow failure multiple times. And I even found an old article from the Los Angeles Times from 1986 talking about this. I couldn't believe I didn't find it before. And it's in my new documentary. But so anyway, and only because of that, because of this tragedy, were they able to fast track the authorization to allow fetal stem cells to be legal and authorized in Ukraine. That's why. And here we are 30 years later, and it's still legal. They never reversed the law. They never changed it. And that's the only reason. So they didn't have to go through a long clinical trial process or anything. And so here we are now 30 years later. There's not been any horror stories. There's been no tumors formed. There's been no bad side effects. And you hear nothing but people like yourself raving about it ever since. So anyway, yeah. So, yeah.
So how did you find it? I mean, how did you find fetal stem cells, and how did you find emcell? I mean, of course, they go hand in hand, but I mean, what made you look at fetal stem cells from the start?
Sure. It's a long story, but I'll give you the short version. So I've released, The God Cells is my 4th movie. My 6th movie is the new one, Ukraine Fetal Stem Cell Pioneers. My 5th movie was this crazy banking story that took place in the country of Andorra, unrelated to medicine. But all of my other movies were about scientific medical innovations that generally are unheard of, that I have found promise in my own research, mainly because I found so many people helped by them. So what happened was I was finishing my 3rd movie, which actually was a whistleblower movie about a scientific therapy that was covered up by a famous cancer institution in the United States. But so nowadays, when you make documentaries, you have to raise money. There's no other way. Like no one buys DVDs anymore. You can't make a profit off of them. So my first movie, I was able to make a profit and sell DVDs, which funded my 2nd and 3rd movie. So going back to my 3rd movie, I was running out of money because no one was buying DVDs anymore. So I had to raise money, but I had enough people that were my fans and some of them were wealthy. So I was raising money to get me finished with my 3rd movie. And one of the guys who was helping me kept asking me to look into fetal stem cells. And by the way, I get emails asking me to look into all kinds of things all the time. And sometimes I'll look into them. Yeah. Sometimes I'll look into them. And other times I just don't have time to. I'll focus on things that I'm passionate about and I really have the time to really, truly take a deep dive on. So anyway, this guy kept saying, you got to look into fetal stem cells. I'll help you out with this, but you got to look into fetal stem cells. So I said, fine, I'll look into it. And it turns out this guy who was operating out of Mexico, who lived in Malibu, only a 30-minute drive from me. I live in Santa Monica, California, a part of Los Angeles, was operating out of Mexico using fetal stem cells. So I ended up going to Mexico 12 times, once a month, and trying to follow. And by the way, I did talk to some other patients that did really well. I'm giving you the quick version of the story. So, and I, by the way, I had never heard of emcell at this stage. This is back in 2014 through 2015. So I went to Mexico 12 times because he only treated people once a month in Mexico. People would fly into San Diego. He'd take them into Tijuana, blah, blah, blah. But nobody that I met that was going there for MS, Parkinson's, whatever, were getting any better, right? But all these people that had been there a year or two prior to me coming along and documenting had good results. So long story short, I figure out, because I gained the trust of this guy who the company is called Stem Cell of America. He tells me that he got them from Ukraine. He discovered this in Ukraine. So me just being an investigative journalist, I started poking around in Ukraine. I found emcell. And so I started emailing emcell and I told them basically everything I told you. And they said, okay, so hold on. They go, do not ever contact us again. We don't want to have anything to do with you. And I didn't understand why. And I was like, oh my God. So after, long story short, me just doing what I do for a living and just being good at doing my job and like helping to gain people's trust and being honest about my intentions, I finally, after multiple, at the time, Skype calls, explaining to emcell my situation and told them that I don't trust this guy. I think there's something wrong with his therapy. Maybe he's run out of cells. I left out a big important part. The guy told me, the guy who was working out of Mexico, that he was trying to replicate the cells himself because he ran out. Forgive me, I forgot about this part. It's been a while, sorry.
How was he replicating it?
Well, he was doing it very haphazardly in his kitchen in his home.
Oh my God.
I know. So you need like a $5 million machine, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of chemicals, and the proper technicians to do this. And he completely botched it. A bunch of people got sick. It was bad. It was really bad. So anyway, I told emcell all of these things. So I just said, but they still didn't want me to film anything. I mean, they understood, they believed me. And they did tell me that this guy, his name was William Rader, did go there and he got the cells from them, but they were very humble. They didn't tell me the true story. Long story short, I go to emcell as a paying patient, just like you were, but I convinced them to let me film it. So I was allowed to keep the cameras in my clinic room. That's it. And then I ended up meeting one of the co-founders during my trip, and he told me the story because he's the one that William Rader from the Mexican clinic met with and he stole a batch of cells from them in 1995, so long ago, when emcell was this tiny little operation working out of one room in a hospital, in a Kyiv state hospital. So he convinced emcell to hand over a batch of only brain and liver. That's it. So the basis of the immune system and the basis of the neurological system, because he had falsified documents that he had a permission from Czechoslovakia to open a clinic. It's such a ridiculous story. It deserves its own documentary. So anyway, that's how I met emcell. So like I had to really fight my way in, and now I'm happy I did. I mean, and now they completely trust me. And a couple of more trips later, they finally let me into the lab. That's why you see the lab in the God cells. Like I had to go to emcell I think it was 6 times the first year to get all I needed. And I kept going 3 or 4 times a year anyway. But in order to gain their trust, I needed a lot of FaceTime with them to really help them, for them to trust me, So it's a really long story.
You did.
Yeah, me too. And I was really happy because it helped me uncover what was happening in Mexico. And so what's really sad is people see the God cells, because you saw there was a clinic in Mexico, if you remember, and I very politely explained that, hey, it's not the same thing. And this is where it's all originated. But this guy passed away, unfortunately, I say unfortunately, but fortunately, frankly, because he doesn't, I can now tell the truth without worrying about him trying to come after me legally. Like, you remember O.J. Simpson, the guy that killed his wife, the famous football player? Yeah. Well, this guy's lawyer was O.J. Simpson's lawyer. So I was honestly...
Well, you gotta be careful then.
Exactly. Well, luckily he's gone now. But what's really sad is Stem Cell of America as a company is still technically open. I mean, these poor unsuspecting people are still going there. I mean, it's so sad, and they don't have any stem cells left. I don't know what they're injecting people with. There's no doctor. Like the guy who stole them that kind of understood it isn't even alive. Like, it's a mess. And now with Russia and Ukraine, it's just such a mess because so many people are still falling victims of that place. But anyway, go ahead.
But isn't it? I mean, don't you have any regulations regarding fetal stem cells in America right now? Or is it
no. Well, first of all, in Mexico, it's illegal. So they're breaking the law by pretending to have fetal stem cells.
Oh, yeah. It's in Mexico. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I thought it was in America. Yeah, but okay.
No. See, here's the thing. This guy was American. His office was in America. He kept the stem cells in his home in Malibu, smuggled them in and out of Mexico every month in the trunk of his car. It's unbelievable. And he would just sit people down in chairs and inject them into the arm and into the abdomen, one injection each, because he at the time for a while, from 1995 up until early, maybe 2010, 2013, which is almost 20 years, he used the same batch of stolen cells for 20 years, which were extremely old technology. Anyway, yeah, that's it. But so
he would replicate the old cells to try to
he tried.
Was that the idea?
That was the idea, but he failed miserably because not only that, he knew, and he told me, because I knew him for a year and a half, he told me, just like emcell did, that you should never replicate them because it ruins their proliferative potential. Just like at the beginning of our conversation when I was explaining that it needs 2 or 3 months to allow them to proliferate inside of your body. You never want them to proliferate outside of the body because you've already ruined them. So he knew he was ruining them. He was just trying to stretch his stock to try to keep his operation going because he knew he could not acquire any more fetal stem cells. Why? Because the only place on earth manufacturing them is emcell in Kyiv, Ukraine. So, yeah, it's crazy.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I remember before they injected me every time, they wanted to do it fast.
Yeah. You want to know why?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead. What was your question first?
No, that was my question. Absolutely. I wanted to. Was that the reason? Because they wanted them to proliferate inside my body, or were they afraid that they might die? Or
Yep. I'll tell you why. So what happens is, in the new movie, it'll all come clear. And frankly, if you've ever seen, did you see the 37-minute preview of my new movie I released? Okay. You remember in the lab, they talk about how they produce them, they bring them in, and they test them, and then they store them, right? Okay. So when they're stored on liquid nitrogen, once they're tested and categorized and ready to go, the reason they rush in is because once they're thawed out, they test them again. They look at them under a microscope again, and they run them through the flow cytometer again to make sure those cells are at 98% live cells, just how they were when they were originally stored. So they have a 10-minute window to test them and give them to you before the cells might start dying. Correct. That's why.
Oh.
So if they're not thrown into the soup of the human being, which is you or me, within 10 minutes. I mean, I'm not saying they're all just going to instantly die in 10 minutes, but they just don't want to risk any chance of even one of those cells dying before they're injected into you. But once they're inside of you, they think they're inside a ginormous fetus, and they don't know where they are because they're thawed to basically room temperature. Then they're sent into the human body, increased to body temperature, and they're alive, and they keep living. So that's why. And
my body and your body don't reject them because, from what I understand, they come with a protein that tells the body not to reject them or something like that. Is that correct?
You know what's funny? Is that what they told you? There was a protein?
No, that's what I think. I read it somewhere about fetal stem cells on the internet, so it might be wrong. But I mean, I assume they're not being rejected for some reason.
Well, after all of the years of animal studies and all of the years of them working with humans later, but mainly in the animal studies, and also just observing the data before they even tested it or gave it to humans after Chernobyl, is that the 7 to 12 week window of gestation, anything earlier can perhaps not, the organs aren't formed well enough to be efficacious enough. But anything after 12 weeks, they can become too mature and rejection can occur. So, and they also, going back to the maternal body and pregnancy in the mother, it's a 7 to 12 week mark generally where the majority of those cells graft into the mother host. So just enough study after 100 years of understanding this mechanism, that's the window. And because of that, they don't understand where they are. They don't understand they're in a new body. They just don't understand. The cells don't understand. So that's why. And so that's foreign DNA technically, but if you think about it, during pregnancy, that fetus in the womb is a foreign DNA to the mother because it's from one man and one woman. Yes, it has her DNA, but the man has very different DNA. And just how a son or a daughter cannot necessarily donate a kidney to their mother. It's the same thing. It's different DNA. So you might ask the question, why are those cells not rejected in the mother while the fetus is in the womb? It's the same question. So does that make sense? It's brilliant if you think about it because
absolutely. Yeah. Makes sense. Yeah.
That's why I called it, trying to think of a name for this documentary, the first one, The God Cells. I couldn't think of a better one. It's like they're just doing God's work, they just don't, you know what I mean? It's like, it is almost like a God cell. So, but so there's no rejection whatsoever. So that's why, unlike a bone marrow transplant where they have to give immunosuppressive drugs to make sure the bone marrow transplant grafts to the host. And you'll probably ask that question because you read a lot about stem cell therapies where they do use immunosuppressive drugs. It's just because that is the old line of thinking. It's the old standard of care. And it goes back to these scientists not understanding how fetal stem cells operate, or they don't understand that you must focus on 7 to 12 week window, not the 16 to 18 week, nothing, So, yeah. And not to mention how valuable the liver cells are from 7 to 12 week, because you're talking about the bone marrow is not formed yet. The blood system hasn't been completely formed yet. So that entire immune system, because the bone marrow and the blood, that's your immune system, right? So the liver,
exactly.
the liver is literally like the explosive immune system foundation. I mean, it's crazy. It's extremely powerful. And of course, the brain is getting formed. And of course, that's the foundation of your entire nervous system. So, yeah.
Well, I also have a heart condition. I have something called cardiac fibrosis, and it pretty much means that I have scar tissue around my heart.
Okay.
And it's unclear how it got there. I mean, they have done pretty much every test they can, and they haven't found the reason. The doctors in Sweden, they even call me a mystery, so it's kind of funny. But it's a serious condition. What were you going to say?
I was going to ask you, did you tell emcell about it? Are they aware of that?
Yeah. So that was one of the things I talked to them about, and they said that they can't do anything about the scar tissue because I'm not sure why. There's no real treatment to remove scar tissue right now anywhere in the world.
It's true.
And it seems like, so it's a problem. But it seems like they are working on it with stem cells, and I think the way they're doing it is with iPS stem cells.
Who is?
I think there's a team in United States and also in England, in the UK. So I'm not sure what they're actually doing, but I know that I saw a TEDx talk with a doctor called Murray. Yeah, a cardiologist named Dr. Murray something. He talked about them using iPS stem cells to treat baboons' heart, which also had some kind of scar tissue, and they've had good results. So I'm not sure where this research is going and what it's gonna. Yeah, what were you going to say?
Well, I can speak on that. Well, first of all, iPS, which means induced pluripotent stem cells, they're very problematic because they behave like an embryonic stem cell. And like embryonic stem cells, one of the most defining traits of an induced pluripotent stem cell is non-cancerous tumor formation, or teratomas. And I even have a scientist in my documentary who was tested iPS in mice for spinal cord injuries. And she said the problem is these mice get tumors because of iPS. So it's very sad that iPS has been talked about so much, because it's very dangerous, because not every person's going to get a tumor, but a lot of people are. And that's why, it's not really a mainstream therapy. There is iPS done in Mexico for people. I would never get that therapy. I mean, it's because, first of all, if you think about it.
No, me neither.
Yeah. If you think about the way iPS is cultivated, so it's often taken from a skin cell or some random adult, 10, 20, 40, 50-year-old cell, right? Then they reverse engineer it to behave like an embryo. And so there's no organ there. It's not a heart cell. It's an embryo. They're not re-engineering it to make a heart cell. So there's that. So iPS is a non-starter for me. And there's a lot of data, and including a scientist who would work with both fetal and iPS for spinal cord injuries in mice, and said fetal is hands down the best. I'm not touching iPS. It causes tumors, blah, blah, blah. Now, going back to emcell, they injected you because they know that you had this heart condition. They injected you with fetal cardiac cells. You got them. I know they did.
Yeah, I think they told me. Yeah.
Well, here's the next step to that. And by the way, no, you cannot fix scar tissue. I mean, scar tissue is scar tissue. You can't just regenerate that. But what they can do, because your heart may be weakened because of the scar tissue, it can strengthen your existing heart tissue tremendously to help counterbalance the scar tissue. So what I filmed for the new documentary that I did not include, but I'm going to do a separate standalone video on it. I filmed the first American in history to ever receive a intracoronary. And what that is, it's the same procedure as putting a stent into the heart. They injected 6 vials of fetal cardiac cells, fetal heart cells, right into this guy's heart. Well, they had the monitors up. Right. They had this tube sticking into his heart with a camera. And this guy had congestive heart failure. He had 25% heart capacity, he had to sleep sitting up because of its congestive heart failure. So your lungs are filling up with fluid.
wow.
So I actually made a special trip to Ukraine to film this guy who, because he was on the heart transplant list, he did not want a heart transplant. He said, "I'd rather do this first, Eric." I was like, "Hey, can I film you?" He said, "Sure." So I go all the way over there. I film this procedure. And the guy is sleeping, sitting up. He studied in Ukraine a little longer for observation. Within 2 days, he was sleeping laying down. He had no more congestion. His heart capacity was increasing.
Same.
He goes back to America. He gets COVID on the plane home and ends up with pneumonia in an ICU and lives. He doesn't die.
No way.
Yeah. No, I have no proof.
Wow,
I know. I have no proof of this, but I think the stem cells saved his life because not only did he get the intracoronary, he got the same therapy that you got on the basic, subcutaneous and intravenous. He didn't get the intrathecal because he didn't have a neuronal issue. So, but unfortunately, he ended up having to get the heart transplant because by the time all this settled, he wasn't going to go back again and risk getting COVID again, and because COVID was still raging at that point. But I filmed all of this. I had trouble finding a way to tell that whole story in the new documentary, so that's why I'm going to do a separate little short movie on the whole thing, so I can properly tell that story. But what I'm trying to say is, if you start developing a really serious heart problem, you could think about getting the intracoronary procedure. That's all I'm saying. You could theoretically.
I had no idea that was available, actually.
Yeah.
The intracoronary. So they do that in emcell.
Yeah. Okay. Well, they do not do it in the clinic. They do not have the facility for it. So they did build the room for it. You saw that brand new clinic, right? That brand new clinic. Remember that room you went into for the intrathecal, the spinal kind of. You walked into that room and you took a left. You remember? You walked into the corridor and took a left.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, on the other side of that section of that area is the intracoronary room. However, while it is complete, they need the equipment to do it, and it's millions of dollars for that equipment. And they were on their way to getting that, and COVID hit. They opened this clinic in November 2019. COVID hits like 6 weeks later, and they almost completely was shut down. They managed to get through that. They get on their feet, and then Russia invades. So they can't exactly pour millions of dollars into this equipment yet. So to answer your question, what they did is they partnered with a hospital that's only 10 minutes from them. They trained the cardiologists on how to do it. And frankly, it didn't take much training. So they're third-party cardiologists that work for a Kyiv hospital because it's the same procedure as a stent. It's all they do. Instead of putting a stent in, they stick in a line like where the camera goes, but they an additional line where they inject 6 huge vials of fetal cardiac cells. It's unbelievable. So they go right into the heart, but of course
so they go through the arm, right?
Yep, correct.
With a catheter. Yeah.
That's exactly right. It was remarkable.
They've done it on me.
Oh, they have.
Yeah. I've done ablation, so they went both through my arm and my thighs.
Wow.
Like the inside of my thighs. I'm not sure.
Well, I'd be curious because now you got me thinking, Casper, because I would love to maybe even document you if you want to do this. So do you have like a certain heart capacity now that, like, is there a measurable thing about your heart that if you did get this intracoronary and you had a huge improvement, like, could it be measured from your doctors in Sweden?
Well, I would have to ask, but what I know is that my heart capacity is pumping at 55%, which is optimal.
Okay.
This is something that I know since last year. The only thing that maybe we can measure is only the scar tissue, which is also very hard to measure since you need to do MRI and stuff like that.
The thing is, it's not going to affect the scar tissue, though. It's just, unfortunately, it's not.
Exactly. So that won't be an option. So.
But that goes to another answer to your limitation question. So in your case, with your heart scar tissue, it's not going to go away. Yeah, all you can do is protect and regenerate the existing non-scarred heart. So
yeah. So that's what they told me as well. They told me that this is going to strengthen my heart, but they can't remove the scar tissue, which is okay for me. I mean, I've done the ablation, and it removed my arrhythmias.
Here's what's interesting, Casper, now that I'm thinking about it, because you were given fetal cardiac cells as well as like the fetal liver cells and all the pre-mesenchymal cells, all the cells related to not only your heart, but your entire circulatory system. You were also given endothelial cells, which build new capillaries and strengthen your existing blood vessels. So it's only been 3 months since your therapy. Have you been back to any cardiologist since you've had the therapy?
No, but I'm having a talk. I have an appointment with my doctor on this Wednesday, and they are going to talk to me about the second ablation, and they will probably do all kinds of tests before, like ultrasound and the standard stuff. So it's going to be really interesting to see what they say. I'm actually eager to see if they've seen any changes in my heart.
Yeah, me too. Here's what I'd like to ask you. First of all, I'm not saying you should tell them you did this, because I'm trying to decide if you should. Are they aware that you've done this, your doctors, fetal stem cells?
No. I'm actually thinking about it myself. Maybe just wait until maybe if they say something.
Here's what because I don't want to, because doctors are emotional creatures because they're humans, right? I would recommend not saying a word, and I would ask them, if you're going to get all these heart tests anyway, because of the new ablation, do it. But what I'm trying to get at is, Casper, is see if they're willing to run every conceivable test on your heart, like whenever, like everything, whatever is conceivable. I've never had any heart issues. Whatever they can do, because I'd be very interested, Casper, to see if they've noticed changes. I'm serious, because you have been given enough fetal heart cells to people with heart attacks and strokes up until the intracoronary, which is, like I said, this American was the first American in history to ever been treated with fetal heart cells in this method. And it was only like the 10th or 12th patient emcell had ever treated. And they had mainly only treated people that were local Ukrainians in their own internal clinical trials to verify that it was successful and safe and all of that. So what I'm trying to say is, but what I'm trying to say is, before this, every other heart patient that went to emcell, every other stroke patient, anyone with heart disease or a heart attack, they were given the therapy just like you were, and they had great improvements. So I'd be interested to see if your heart has improved measurably. So just keep that in mind, and don't say anything to them about the fetal stem cells until afterwards, if you say anything at all.
I won't. I won't say a word. The thing is, I think the 55% capacity is like the maximum. I think that's how they measure it. Yeah, so I don't think we're going to see an improvement there, but I think they might see a difference in the EKG or ECG. How do you say it?
Well, electrocardiogram, so it's ECG.
ECG, right? Yeah, I think it's ECG. Yeah. So they might find, because that's the two standard tests they do. They do an ultrasound and they do an ECG. So we might see a difference there, because usually doctors tell me, we can see abnormal stuff happening in your heart, and if I have extra beats or something like that, and they can measure how many times per hour I have these extra beats, which is also what causes the arrhythmias. Like, they are the thing that starts if you know what I mean. It's like a dance, and when they lose when the extra heartbeat comes, they lose the rhythm, and then the arrhythmia starts. So hopefully I might see an improvement in the ECG. So, but I'll keep you updated.
Yeah, please do. You know what I'd also like to keep you updated on is you may be going back, especially with your parents. And the reason I say this is because, I'm going to go back every year, regardless of the Russia situation. And even though I was there in September, filming a lot of people, did you see my short film of us there in September?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Anyway, but my normal annual therapy is always July, so I'm aiming for July, which because you were just there in October. You could go earlier. Yeah. I mean, if you go earlier, please go ahead. You don't have to go just because I'm there. What I'm trying to say is it would be super fun to be there at the same time as you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it would be fun.
Yeah, particularly if. That. Yeah. I mean, it's always fun with a group, and who knows? Maybe if we're lucky, this whole Russia situation will be over with. Who knows?
So how was it? How was it for emcell? I mean, I know they're out of. Are they affected by the bombings, or how are they doing?
Luckily, emcell, they were pretty smart. So, I mean, they're clever people, as you know already, just being incredibly smart doctors. But see, once Crimea was annexed in 2014, and that was right around the time they decided they wanted to build a new updated clinic, like a brand new state-of-the-art clinic, they strategically located the new clinic in an area that would not be of strategic interest in case there was a military attack. So what that means is it's not close to any energy infrastructures. It is close to some residential areas, but it's not like downtown or the city area of Kiev. It's called Kiev. They are in Kiev, but they're not in the middle of like downtown. I mean, it's like a 40-minute drive, sometimes an hour, depending on traffic, to get from downtown Kiev to the new clinic. So, answer your question, there's that. So they have not had any explosions or bombs or missiles landing anywhere near them. They did say to me, because I obviously asked them every question I could about this invasion when I was there. They said on February 24th, they called everyone into the conference room trying to decide what they were going to do. They had patients in the building. They're like, do we go home? Do we send everyone home? What do we do? And when they were sitting in the conference room, you remember it's all glass. The building's all glass. And they all watched they watched a gigantic missile fly across the sky right in front of them, past the building. And they both said, well, that answers the question. We have to get the hell out of here. Yeah. So anyway, so to answer your question, they also have, because they need to make sure, even without an invasion, they have a backup generator, a diesel generator that runs the clinic. I have been on Zoom calls with them during the invasion where the lights go out for about 10 seconds and they turn back on because the light goes out because, if they're conserving electricity or they need to turn things off, and then their generator kicks in. So to answer your question, I mean, because they're humble, strong people, that to them, Russia being a threat is every day to them, even before this. I mean, as far as they're concerned, Russia has been at war with them since 2014, as far as they're concerned. And they're used to Russia committing genocide in their country every 100 years, like it's in their DNA. So to answer your question, they're just continuing business as usual. I mean, they're being careful and they're not idiots about it. They're not being completely, ignorant to the reality. But they're just trying their best to continue business as usual and trying to keep their business going. And big people that need the therapy are still going. I mean, I've talking to between 5, sometimes 10 or 12 patients per month. When my group had 9 people in September, in October, I think at least 8 to 10 people went, you being one of them. And then in October, I think 8 to 10 people went. And then December, maybe 5. In January, I'm aware of at least maybe 3 for sure. Maybe a half a dozen might total go so far. But just because I say that, these are just the people I'm talking to. I don't speak to everyone that goes. If somebody reaches out to me, I talk to them, but not everybody reaches out to me that goes. So, I mean, they're not doing great, but they're not doing horrible either. They're not going to go belly up or anything. So,
but I mean, so that's first of all, that's really nice to hear that they're doing fine, because they're really, really nice people. They really took care of me and my wife. But I think July might be. I think they told me to wait at least 12 months.
Okay.
I'm not sure. So maybe they said 9 to 12 months, but they told me that I'm going to be, because a lot of people want to go, like after a few months, they want to go again. Yeah. And they said that we tell people to not go, at least wait 12 months, because the cells are still doing work, and you are going to see more improvements during this year. Wait. I don't know. Maybe I'm going to have to talk to them. Let's see what they say. Maybe this summer might be a bit too early for me.
That's okay. I don't know for certain. I haven't what to say. I haven't purchased my plane tickets for July yet. This is sort of loosely an idea. But honestly, I mean, to be honest, again, going back to our conversation about the proliferation of the cells, that is why they say that, because they understand how they behave inside of you. But they will treat some patients, in rare cases, as early as 6 months later, depending on the condition. But generally 9 months is like, okay, 9 months is enough time. I'm just telling you based on what I've seen. But there's reasons why they say this. They say 12 months for two reasons. One, of course, it's best to wait 12 months for the reasons scientifically. But they also don't want to try to oversell their therapy and make it sound like you have to come back more often than needed.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's also part of it. They try to be very humble
Of course.
and loose about that. And it's always just a suggestion. It's not a requirement. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah. So I mean, it also depends on how well am I doing. I'm hoping my improvements will continue. So, but I mean, even if I'm 90% recovered and there's 10% left, I'm going to go again. So for me, it doesn't really matter. I'm probably going to go again, and I'm going to bring my parents. So I'm hoping that the whole war thing with Russia just stops. And to be honest, it was tough to go from from Sweden to Ukraine.
Oh yeah.
It took us about almost 2 days.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, from Sweden to Kyiv, it's like 2 hours flight. In normal conditions.
Imagine me coming from Los Angeles.
Yeah.
It was crazy.
So for you, it must be like 3 or 4 days.
Well,
I mean, that's crazy.
Well, to be honest, I think we left. We left on a Friday, landed Saturday morning in Warsaw, caught the train several hours later on Saturday, arrived in Kyiv on Sunday. So it really wasn't that bad. So it was basically 2 days, Friday to Sunday. So, and the only sleep we got was on the plane from LA to Warsaw and then on the train. So of course we were exhausted Sunday. We didn't get that much sleep. And, but yeah, it's brutal. I mean, the train ride, 17 hours. I mean, having a private sleeper car is nice, but it really, you realize what we took for granted. I know that was your first time there, but I don't know if you know this, but I've been there 30 times. Only one of those times was, the train ride. Oh my. And so I got really used to this.
You've been there 30 times?
Oh yeah. Think about it. Okay. 2016, I was there between 2016. Okay. I went there 2 or 3 times in 2016 because I didn't get there until early summer. And then 2017, I was there several more times because, again, like I told you, I kept having to go back. I didn't need to, but I wanted to because I realized what I just stumbled upon. And I needed to spend more time with them in person if they were going to trust me to allow me to get in that lab. And by the way, I say it in the new movie, which I neglected to say in the first movie, I am the first member of the outside public who has ever stepped foot in that lab, ever. Nobody from the outside world other than emcell staff has been in there. And so, of course, also, if I'm going to interview patients for a new documentary, the only way to do that is to keep going back. It's the only way. So not only am I going once a year for myself, then there's also, I made a special trip for my father. I made a special trip for my wife's mother. I made a special trip for my wife's wife, and every time I go, I make an announcement, on the website or whatever, and say, hey, I'm going to be there in case you want to go. And that's also how I'm able to get new patients for the documentaries or this documentary. So, but it's funny. I didn't realize it was 30 times. But when Russia invaded, I was so devastated, as you can imagine, in February. Yeah. I decided to add up. For the first time ever, I went through and calculated how many times I'd been there. And the least amount of time I spent there was a week, but I've been there up to 3 weeks at a time. And I've spent almost a year of my life there cumulatively. It's crazy.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. And
this is from 2016 up until now then?
Up until 2022, yeah. Wow. And 2022 was the only time I ever been there once. That's it, So, yeah. I was there.
Yeah, but you only did the treatment once per year, right?
Correct. Yeah. I've had the treatment 6 times. Okay. Even though I skipped in COVID 2020. I didn't get the treatment in COVID.
And do you feel like, you don't have the same issues I have, but do you feel like the effect is, you mentioned it before, but do you feel like for every time you do it, the effect is accumulating?
Yeah. Well, nothing for me as an anti-aging protocol, whereas I didn't have any damage, or someone like yourself with an issue that you're noticing that quickly, like brain damage. But the first therapy for me was the most powerful, partly due because I think I mentioned earlier that, I didn't have any expectations. I was just going to go there to be able to film and get in there. And I just wanted to film it, because I realized that the way they did it was way different than the way that the guy that was treating people in Mexico Mexico. He just stuck somebody in a chair and stuck a needle in their arm. Like they did a full set of diagnostics and they had a whole protocol that was personalized, and it went, a matter of days. And like, as you experienced, the first therapy was when I was like, oh my God, like it took about a couple of months, and I went, this is crazy. I couldn't believe how I was feeling. So of course I couldn't wait to get it again. And of course, when I got it the second time, and I felt great, but it wasn't as dramatic as the first one. I think because I was still doing so well. But here's what's interesting. Here I am, 50. I go to the gym all the time. I have one like 2 blocks away. I'm not like some crazy in shape buff guy or anything, but I just go to the gym regularly. I don't have any aches and pains. I do lift kind of heavily and I kind of abuse my body a little bit. I don't know, you know what I mean? And I tend to not get, because I've been so busy, especially lately, I'll get like only, like last night I slept 4.5 hours. I'm not saying that's a good idea. I feel unbelievable. It's like I've got so much energy. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And like, and I never get sick. Yeah. Like I never have any of these things. I sleep great and sound. Like I have these sleep monitoring things on my bed and on this thing I wear on my arm. Like my REM is like ridiculous, like how deep my REM is and my deep sleep versus my light sleep. And I don't think that was ever like that before. Like I would need to sleep 8, 9, sometimes 10 hours. I would just be like dragging out of bed. I don't have that. So to answer your question, yeah, I feel unbelievable. I mean, for anybody else my age that has never had this, that is kind of the same body build and the same lifestyle, like I'm way better off than they are. And frankly, friends and family that haven't seen me in years are kind of shocked when they see me, because they're just like, what have you been doing? Like, you look younger than I saw you last. What is going on? And I don't know. It's interesting. So I would like to get this every year for the rest of my life, honestly. I see no reason not to. I think it's worth the investment compared to...
I agree.
And there's a lot of reason to believe that it's a cancer preventative, aside from being a preventative for heart disease, liver disease, everything disease. It's a preventative for arthritis because it's so anti-inflammatory. It's preventative for brain decline. Obviously has been a preventative for any weird aches and pains in joints. I have no knee, ankle, elbow pain, shoulder, nothing. Yeah, I just feel remarkable.
I mean, I'm not where you are, but I can say that it's insane how fast things went from like. That's actually one thing. The thing you mentioned about sleep, because I told you I couldn't sleep before. Mm-hmm. I had to go on medication. I've slowly stopped taking my sleep medication. It's something that's still with me because I'm a little bit traumatized. When you're not able to sleep for 10 years, you're a bit traumatized. So the bad habits are still with me, but I'm slowly stopping taking them. So, but one thing I noticed is that I'm now able to sleep without them. Mm-hmm. But there was a few weeks ago, where I couldn't sleep at all. Something happened. I was like, why can't I sleep? I wasn't feeling very bad when I woke up. I wasn't feeling very bad. I was like, I'm still feeling pretty good. I'm tired, but if this was 3 months prior, I would have been totally crushed. But now I'm like, okay, this is affecting me, but it's not fun. What is happening with me? I wanted to find out what was happening. But I think I figured out what it was.
Okay.
Because, I mentioned I haven't been able to think.
Yes.
It was painful for me to think because it's hard to explain. You have to experience it. But I realized that I'm actually able to think now.
Yeah.
And I was thinking so much that I couldn't sleep.
Yep. There you go.
So that was a dilemma for me. So I had to kind of like work on it. Like, how am I supposed to get some sleep now? When I'm going to bed, I'm just thinking about all kinds of stuff. The results are remarkable. You can't. It's magical. You can't really explain it.
Isn't it weird too that how you can't explain it? That's the most interesting part. People try to say to me, "Well, how does it feel?" And it's really hard to explain because and it's same for you. Like you had brain damage. I mean, of course, you can explain things like I think better, yada yada. But it's hard to really explain it properly because like it's easy to explain. How does caffeine affect you? It's easy to explain that. How does this particular medication affect you? These are chemicals basically, but when you're injected with 24 different organ stem cell types, that's biology, that's so unfamiliar to what we're used to having given to us. It's very difficult to verbalize what it feels like. So,
I don't think it's possible.
I think you're right.
Because there's a lot of different things happening. It's not only one thing. It's like maybe 10 different things happening at the same time. So
yeah. Well, it makes sense because you were given almost 24 different organ cell types, hitting, nearly 24 different parts of your body, targeting, not only your brain. So it's fascinating.
Yeah.
And so also too, going back, I mean, the very idea, like you got the endothelial cells and the cardiac cells. So by default, your circulatory system is doing way better, which of course helps your brain. It's all hand in hand. It's a very holistic, they're treating the whole body. So the whole body is going to have this interesting reaction versus just one part. Like if you get a headache and you take a Tylenol, then your headache goes away. But, that's it, but, this is treating everything, So, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this is one.
What would you say?
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, you please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Well, I was going to ask, you had experience with MS patients, right?
Mm-hmm.
How many times, because I have a friend who has MS, and how many times would you say it's, of course, it's a degenerative disease, but how many times usually does it take for someone to notice good results?
Oh, it completely.
Even if it also, yeah.
Well, how long ago was this person diagnosed?
Maybe 10 years ago.
Okay. How is their mobility right now? Are they able to walk around? Are they in a wheelchair or?
They're not in a wheelchair. They are walking around, but they have what do you call them? It's like the thing where old people have when they walk.
Like a walker.
What do you call it? Like a walker or something like that. Yeah.
Okay, so going back to our conversation, so every single patient that I have met that has MS, no matter how bad, just in my experience, has seen improvements. Every single one. Now, whether or not it can completely reverse it after one therapy is something different. So this is going to be great to help you answer the question when you see my new documentary, which I can't forget to send it to you. I'll send it you the link and password on WhatsApp when we're finished. And that'll answer all of your questions. If you really watch that section carefully, and frankly, if you want to send this to your friend, you know what, better yet, if your friend wants to see it, tell him to email me or give him my email. Because what I do is I change the password to these links every so often. So, but I think it'll be good for him to see it because I would want to see it if I was in his position. So to answer your question, to be honest, I have not personally seen an MS patient say that did nothing for me, particularly only 10 years out. Remember, I talked to you about a woman that was diagnosed 18 years ago that had 20 years of damage because she noticed the decline for 2 years and didn't get it diagnosed until 18 years, until that point. So she really had it for 20 years at least, and she was in a walker and all of that stuff too. And also the thing is with MS, it has different degrees. Some are more progressive than others. Some people have a mild version and some people have a really aggressive version. You'll meet a guy, Chad, that was only diagnosed a year before his first treatment. And while he's okay, but one of his arms still don't work. And he was able to walk though. Wow. And he was falling like 6 to 10 times a day. He doesn't fall anymore. He just has a new baby. He was never able to hold the baby until he got the therapy. Now he can hold the baby. Those are huge things. Even though he's not perfect, his right arm still doesn't work properly, but his left arm works perfectly, and he's able to walk around again and be a dad, So
they still have to keep doing the treatment, right?
Well, they don't have to. It's really up to the patient. But if they want to continue seeing improvement, they kind of should. But frankly, anybody that does this once that has MS and they see improvement, they're going to be like, I can't believe I found something that works. Yes, I'm going to do this every year. Absolutely. Because there's no drug that can do this. There's no drug there's nothing that can do what this therapy can do. So, and even though it is, you remember what you paid for it, but these MS drugs, they're like 100,000, 200,000 a year. Yeah. Insurance covers it. And I'm talking about in America, at least. What emcell charges is a fraction of that, but unfortunately you have to pay for it. That's the only difference. So, yeah.
Of course. And they have side effects as well. So.
Oh yeah. No, the MS drugs have terrible side effects. And that's something that, they're also afraid of.
I feel like, we mentioned iPS cells, right?
Yep.
before we talked about. Yeah, so I feel like scientists are working on iPS cells now because they kind of want to avoid fetal stem cells because it's such a controversial topic.
Yep.
I
You
feel like maybe that's
You are absolutely right. You're absolutely right. In fact, everybody, it's not just the IPS scientists, everybody is scrambling to find anything that can compete with fetal stem cells. And they just can't do it because you can't, especially when it comes to neurological issues like MS or brain damage. You cannot create a neuronal stem cell out of a blood cell or a skin cell or any cell. I mean, I don't mean to laugh, but it's a joke. I mean, and in fact, the lead scientist from emcell is in my new documentary explaining this. She goes, I've been to a lot of conferences. I go to as many stem cell conferences as I can to meet other people. And every single conference, after I do my presentation, I have some scientists quietly come up to me and say, we have worked with fetal stem cells in the past. They're very effective. Unfortunately, we're not allowed to work with them because of the so-called ethical issues and because they don't think they could ever be legalized. And they said to her, you are so lucky that you're able to work with fetal stem cells. We envy you. We wish we could.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And she said it on camera. I mean, of course, I asked her, who's the scientist? And she's like, well, I cannot tell you their names. I will never allow you to do that. But your assumption is absolutely correct. IPS and all of it, they're trying to compete with fetal. It's like, I don't know how to compare it to it. I mean, it's like trying to create artificial oxygen. Like, why would you do that? You have oxygen, it's like oxygen's everywhere.
And I also want to mention that, the two research teams I mentioned before, the one who are working on scar tissue, cardiac scar tissue. I mean, it's nothing that's available. It's something that is still being researched.
And that's
even if it.
That's the problem. If you remember in the God Cells, I interviewed CIRM, the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine. They have been working for more than a decade on trying to get anything FDA approved. $8 billion. Nothing. And it's sad. And it goes back to the market problem. And we read all these headlines. Oh, they've found this great treatment for this and that. And unfortunately, maybe your grandkids will have access to that. I mean, it's almost none of it, especially stem cell related, will ever reach the market. It's very, very sad. It's very sad.
I think it's insane because, I mean, fetal stem cells have been around. Fetal stem cells have been around for more than 30 years, right? At least 30 years.
Well, that 1986 was the first people ever treated with fetal for Chernobyl. So just go ahead and say 86 on. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So it's. I think it's so crazy that we're not using it. It's like it's there, and it could help so many people. But I mean, there are stem cells. I mean, I don't know about MSC stem cells. I know there are clinics that help people with joint pains and stuff like that, and maybe it helps. I don't know.
Yeah, it does.
I can't.
MSC, mesenchymal, will help with joint sports injuries. It does help because it's the only thing they've been proven to transform into. They can't become a heart, lung, liver, brain cell, but they can become cartilage or connective tissue and sometimes bone. They can help those things. Yeah.
So do you think fetal stem cells will be available mainstream, or do you think that iPS stem cells will become the next thing that will substitute fetal stem cells?
The thing is, I can't see anything becoming a substitute for fetal. It's impossible. Like it's scientifically impossible. It's like trying to ride a bike across the Atlantic Ocean. You can't do it unless somebody builds a bridge, right?
Yeah.
So in IPS, again, they cause tumors. There's nothing they can do about it. It causes tumors, just like embryonic does. But to answer your question, do I think fetal stem cells will become mainstream? Unfortunately, Casper, I don't mean to sound cynical. I've just been following this kind of work for a long time. The answer is no. Not in our lifetime, no. And unless the entire, both monetary and economic and medical system is so revamped where profit isn't the sole reason for this to operate, the world to operate, which then we get into this whole rabbit hole of communism and socialism, and unless profit is taken out, there's no way. It's just not possible. And not to mention the political side of the abortion issue. That's a whole nother monster to tackle. So I spent years, and when I first, like my first documentary, Brzezinski, was about a scientist who created a very interesting treatment for cancer that he owned the patents on. And by the way, it just recently got re-released on YouTube. It's got pushing 2.3 million views in just 2 weeks. And I used to be a big activist about this. That was my first documentary, and it was the most popular, which just kind of gave me my career. I used to be a big activist trying to change the system and say, convince the government and why won't you let this therapy come to market? Even though the American Food and Drug Administration did allow it to be tested, even though the Japanese did randomized studies and proved that it works, they doubled the survival rate in the randomized study in this inventors treated group, and still got nowhere. And I realized what a waste of time it was. And I said, okay, my focus really should be on finding the technologies, and in this case, fetal stem cells, telling a good story and helping those people who need it now. And it's unfortunate that only people that have the means can get it, and are willing nowadays to go to Ukraine during a Russian invasion, like yourself and like myself. And so I found that my time was better spent focusing on helping those people, and those people are my audience, versus trying to change the system. Like, for example, I haven't told this story in a while. Like, you have to see the documentary to appreciate this. But when I did the first documentary, when they needed to get $300 million roughly to do FDA phase 3 randomized studies for this particular rare brain cancer in children. And the guy who was in charge of raising this money was old college roommates with President Obama's chief of staff. Okay. This was back in 2009. Obama just got elected. So this guy calls me up and says, I'm meeting with Obama's chief of staff, David Axelrod, soon in Washington, D.C. Where is your documentary at this stage? Because I hadn't released it yet. I said, well, it's basically done. I'm just waiting to get music done, blah, blah, blah. So I FedEx it to him, and he gets it. He shows it to David Axelrod, the chief of staff of President Obama. And I was very naive, thinking, oh my God, the White House is going to see my doc. This is going to change everything. Because once they see this, how could they possibly not do something about it, right? And so the guy calls me back a couple weeks later and says, I met with David Axelrod. And he said, you're not going to believe what he said. I said, what? And remember, these guys were old college friends, right? These are just friends having lunch. There wasn't like a meeting to pitch him anything. And he said, Axelrod watched the movie and said, it's very important. But he said, this is just too big. It's too big. He said, even if he said, maybe in 10 years we can face this issue. He said, but even if we did, and we allowed this one man who has patents on this therapy to get his therapy approved for market, it would destroy the existing cancer market, and it potentially create Wall Street in a downfall. He's like, so many pharmaceutical industries would go under because no one would want chemotherapy or radiation as a first line of defense if they know they have this gentle, non-toxic, I left that part out. This therapy is non-toxic. It doesn't make your hair fall out. It doesn't do any of that stuff. It's not the easiest therapy to administer. But anyway, so that was a behind the scenes friendly conversation. So that was like the biggest eye opener for me to go, wow. Like even the White House said, nah, this is too big. Can't touch this one. Yeah, I get it. I know it works, but no, we can't touch this one. So imagine fetal stem cells. I mean, it's crazy.
I mean, that's even bigger. And I know for a fact that the FDA in America, I mean, it's so crazy how people who work with the FDA then later go on to work for medical companies. Like, what are you guys doing?
It's a revolving door. Yeah. No, the FDA does not work for the American public. The FDA works for the pharmaceutical industry. And I'm not being sarcastic. It's really true. Like they are the police.
Yeah, I know it's true.
Yeah. So.
And the sad part is that the FDA's decision affects even us in Sweden.
Oh, yeah.
It's like whatever America does is like the rest of the world does.
It's exactly right. I have another example for you. So I mentioned how this cancer therapy was tested in Japan. It was tested for over 10 years independently by the Japanese in a medical research part of a university, a medical school. Because like most medical universities, they have a research department. They tested it for 10 years. They got all the way to the final phase of testing, randomized studies. And I went all the way to Japan to interview these people, by the way. And I actually helped them get this study published because I said, why did you not publish this? Anyway, so I said to them, why on earth, you've already made it this far, farther than we have in the United States with this medication. Why would you not get it approved just for the Japanese people? And he said, Well, first of all, you need a major pharmaceutical behind it with a lot of money to lobby the Japanese, regulatory agency to do it. I said, well, why wouldn't you do that? I said, I can probably help you raise that money. I mean, what the heck, right? It's like, how hard could that be? He said, well, the problem is, Eric, if the Japanese regulatory agency, just call it the Japanese FDA, if the Japanese FDA approved it for the Japanese, he said the American FDA would retaliate by no longer approving any drugs that is produced in Japan in the United States. And because the American FDA is basically the king, the holy grail of all regulatory agencies of the world. For example, anything that's approved by the American FDA is almost rubber stamped in approval in Germany, France, Italy, Sweden, you name it. Like, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Like, you don't, just because something goes through 20 years of testing in the US doesn't mean Sweden goes, okay, you did it. Now we're going to go through our 20 years of testing in Sweden. No. They're just going to approve it because the American FDA did it. Anyway, the Japanese said, we wouldn't want to risk. Yeah, we know it works. We know it would save so many lives, but why would we destroy the entire Japanese pharmaceutical industry just to release one drug to help cure cancer? Why would we do that? Right?
Yeah.
So, I mean,
it makes sense.
Yeah.
If you can't make money.
Yeah. I mean, why would you destroy a whole industry and put, thousands of people out of work just to help cure cancer? Like, I think from a moral standpoint, it's a good idea. But if you think about it from an economic standpoint, which it all comes down to, it's just, you can't do it.
Disaster.
Yeah, it's a disaster. Like, one guy said in my second Brzezinski movie, because I did 2 of them, he said, it was a pharmaceutical scientist. I interviewed one. He said, if you found a cure for cancer, you're putting yourself out of business. Like, what are you going to do now? Like, you found a cure. What are you going to go off and do? What are your employees going to do? Not to mention, you have all of the money of all the cancer institutions that are researching cancer across the United States, where they get matching government funds. So the government says, we'll give you $1 million. So you get private funding for $1 million, and then the government gives you another $1 million. So all that goes away. It's gone. So imagine if fetal heart cells was unleashed, fetal stem cells was unleashed. What's going to happen to heart surgeries? What's going to happen to diabetes medications? What's going to happen to MS medications? What's going to happen to every medication outside of cancer? It'll be a train wreck financially. So it's just, anyway, so knowing that, and I know that deep down, it's like, why not just help people instead of banging your head against the wall and asking yourself, why can't this be mainstream? That's just me. So.
Yeah. I mean, I agree 100% because, I mean, you can't wait for the doctors to cure you. You have to do your own research.
Yeah.
There's 10 years to find this treatment. That's 10 years of my life. So I'm not saying I'm mad at the doctors because they don't know any better. If they were in my position, they wouldn't have gotten any help either. So, yeah.
There's no reason to get mad at the doctors. I mean, they only know what they're taught. And, and as they call it practicing medicine because they're constantly, as they say, practicing this thing to get better at it, but they're only allowed to work within the limitations, so they're not going to say to you, hey, I've heard about this. I had this patient, Casper, who had brain damage. Like, I guarantee you, your doctor, if you tell your doctor that you've had this improvement with brain damage, and especially if it was measurable somehow, and the next guy with your exact condition, he's not going to say, oh, I have this patient, Casper, who went to Ukraine. He's not going to say that. He's not going to say that. He's not allowed.
He might lose his job.
He probably would lose his job. Correct. And one thing that people forget is the doctor works for you. You don't work for the doctor. You're paying the doctor for a service. So, and it sounds like you've already figured that out, but a lot of people haven't figured that out, and they just sort of blindly believe everything. When I say that is, I can't tell you how many times people have watched my documentary, who knows, stroke, MS, Parkinson's, you name it, or a kid with autism, and they email me and I say, yeah, they've had great results with this or that, just like how you did. And then they go, a week later, they go, I went into my doctor and they said this was not a good idea. It could cause cancer. There's not enough, it could be dangerous. And that's it. And they believe the doctor blindly and they never go. And so it's sad, it's very sad.
Yeah, fortunately, I don't have any trust in the medical system anymore. So whatever the doctor tells me,
Well, honestly,
I'm actually in contact. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say the vast majority of the people like yourself that I talk to are people like you that have learned their lesson, and especially if they have difficult to treat ailments like brain damage. I mean, there's no drug to treat it, as we talked about. There's nothing that you can do that's available to Western medicine that can do anything for you except fetal stem cells.
It's complex, and it took me 3 years before I understood what had happened to me. And when I found out, I saw that there was a team research in Gothenburg, so I contacted them, and she said there's no treatment available today. So the only thing they have tried it's ADHD medicine. That's about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we'll see. Maybe yeah.
I was going to say, well, which this therapy has done wonders for as well as ADHD. Yeah. Fetal stem cells. Yeah.
Yeah, so I have ADHD as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, Casper, I could still talk to you, but if we don't wrap it up, no one's going to listen to this whole interview.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
And it's 9 p.m. here for people that are listening. It's getting really late, so I think it's a good idea to.
I'll tell you what. I mean, I'd love to stay in touch with you, and you're always welcome to obviously WhatsApp me anytime. I'm gonna text you the movie now. Another reason I know what it was. Another reason I would think would be great for your friend who has MS to speak to me or just email me is because he'll send his information to emcell, right? Get officially invited. Because as you know, they don't just take walk-ins.
Yeah.
They want to review cases. So, and I'm happy to let him meet all of the MS patients in my documentary. They'll be glad to speak to him on WhatsApp, but I appreciate if he got invited first, so I'm not wasting their time. And I also, we'd like to have an idea that if he feels like he really wants to go, because I really want to respect the time of these people. They're busy like everybody else. But if he's really serious about maybe going, I'm happy to put him in direct contact with these people, and because nothing's better.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the same with you. Like if somebody contacts me in a month who's say 37, 47 years old, whatever, and says I have brain damage due to drugs, I would say, oh my God, you got to speak to this guy, Casper. I'm sure you'd be happy to speak to him, right? Wouldn't you
I would love that.
Yeah. See, yeah.
That's why I'm speaking to you right now.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what I love doing, honestly, because I love connecting people. That's why I like doing the podcast. People can listen to this. And then, of course, taking it one step further, if your friend with MS wants to speak to these other people, and it's always great to have him watch the documentary first so he understands who he's speaking to.
Yeah, I think that would really help. And I also want to say it's a woman, but it doesn't really matter. That's my bad. I didn't mention it. So, people are skeptical.
Yep.
It's a good thing. I think it's healthy.
Then what she should do is watch the movie first. She should watch the movie first because I have convinced. I wish I could name drop here, but I've met a lot of interesting, powerful people. Some of them famous in my years of doing this, and I sent this new movie to all of them, and a lot of them had never. They were only familiar with my previous work. They never saw the God cells. They only saw this, and they lost their minds. They lost their minds. And one in particular is very powerful in governments, actually.
Okay.
I won't even say the gender. This person was very excited and wants to see what they can do to help. That's as far as I can go with that here. And we can talk about it off the record, some very exciting possibilities. But I don't want to say anything here because it's just too early. And I don't want to get people unnecessarily excited. But anyway.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'll talk to her and hopefully the documentary will come in, sir. But we'll keep in touch. Thank you so much, Eric.
Yeah, my pleasure, man.
Thank you for everything.
Hey, Casper, it's my pleasure, honestly. Thank you for taking the time to share your story. A lot of people would love to hear our conversation, but who knows? You might end up helping someone in your similar condition who listens to this conversation.
That's what I'm hoping.
Yeah.
That's what I'm hoping.
Yeah. Well,
Thank you for having me.
Hey, my pleasure. And thank you for taking the time. So you're in Sweden. It's 9:00 there. It's 12 noon in California.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I hope you have a great night.
You too.
All right.
Have a great day.
Thanks. You too.
All right, great.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
That was episode 20 of the God Cells podcast. As always, feel free to email me at eric@ericmerola.com. And in regards to Ukraine fetal stem cell pioneers, my latest and 6th documentary, it is my proudest work yet. I think most of you will be blown away. I do a deep dive into the science of this technology. I have unbelievable, remarkable stories of remissions of multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, nonverbal child with autism speaking for the first time. It's really remarkable, and it was actually kind of unbelievable to witness what I witnessed unfold before my eyes, honestly, while working on this. I had been following some of these patients since 2015. So if you want to be notified of its release, free on YouTube for the world, be sure to sign up for my mailing list at ericmerola.com or stemcellsmovie.com, or follow the project on Facebook or Twitter, or just email me and I'll add you to the list. Until next time, I'm Eric Merola.